So what Saeed's not telling you is that when I was in YPO with him in the same chapter, a lot of tech guys in the chapter, I'm a boutique hotelier, we'd sit around dinner and they'd be talking about shipping product and all this. They were talking this lingo I just didn't understand. And ironically, at age 52, I'm 55 now, at age 52, I joined Airbnb. There are not a lot of people who join their first tech company at age 52. And the first day I was in a meeting and just listening, and these guys were, one guy actually said a philosophical question. He said, if you ship a feature and nobody uses it, did it really ship? I was like, okay. And they kept talking about shipping product, and I went home that night and I called my friend and I said, I am in fucking deep ship. I don't even know what shipping product means. So that was 38 months ago. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my sojourn, my experience with the three founders at Airbnb and our experience as a company. But I'm going to give a backdrop to give you a start about just innovation, my point of view on innovation, especially around hospitality real estate, because I think there are some real common themes here. But let me just say that what was particularly interesting to me when the founders, so Brian Chesky reached out to me in early 2013. He said, we've got a rocket ship that's going very fast and we need somebody to help steer it with us and to help run it, because we have, with the three founders, we have two who have a great design background, one who has an engineering background, so we got the design and the tech piece covered, but there's not a person in our company who has a travel background and nobody from hospitality or the hotel industry. So I sort of came along. I didn't, at that time, in early 2013, I did not have an Uber app. I didn't have a Lyft app. I'd never used Airbnb. So I was really naive. And there's a great quote I'm going to start with. So the subtext of my talk is going to be how to see and surf a disruption. But this quote pretty much says it all. This is William Gibson, who's a science fiction writer. He says, the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. So the future had not been distributed to me in the first quarter of 2013. I didn't have any sharing economy apps on my phone. I didn't really even know what Airbnb was, even though I was based in San Francisco. So what I was curious about and what I was fascinated by was the idea of democratizing hospitality. In the last, I've been a hotelier for 30 years, I sold my company 6 years ago to John Pritzker, whose father started Hyatt, but I kept the real estate. So I still owned 20 hotels. I still own today 14 hotels. So I have seen over 30 years the hotel industry get more and more. It used to be the hospitality business, small h, big B. I'm sorry, big H, small b. And it's really become small h, big B. And it's generally the hotels of the world are owned by REITs and private equity companies, things like that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it's changed the business. And the idea that here's these three young guys don't know a thing about hospitality. They've created an opportunity for micro-entrepreneurs to become hospitality entrepreneurs was fascinating to me. But the thing that was particularly fascinating was how could we create a dependable product from people who are not our employees in 191 countries. That was what was very curious to me. I'll tell you at the end of my talk, we'll have some Q&A at the end of the talk as well. I'll give you what I've learned in the 38 months about this, because at this point, Airbnb's customer satisfaction for our guests is significantly higher than the average for the global hotel companies. We use the same metric, which is NPS, as they do. So we have actually figured something out, and I'll talk a little bit about how did we learn that. But let's start with, I think, a backdrop. And my backdrop is to talk about 3 rules of innovation. I think these are 3 relatively generic rules, but they're particularly relevant to hospitality, but I think they're relevant to any industry. The first rule is an innovation doesn't typically arrive without some foreshadowing. I'm going to show you 3 different innovations in hospitality real estate that happened before Airbnb came along. And they'll have the same 3 cycles, or the same cycle, from that to the fact that the innovation that is being created addresses an unmet human need. Some of you, if you know me, the book that Saeed was talking about, I've written 4 books, but my favorite of the 4 is one called Peak, how great companies get their mojo from Maslow. It's about applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to any company or organization. So what I talk about in that book is that customers have unmet, unrecognized needs at the top of the pyramid, and innovations are usually happening there. So just think of that most established companies get very good at the bottom of the pyramid, the survival needs of their customers, but they're not very focused on the thing that somebody hasn't done yet. And this is particularly the reason why, generally speaking, innovations happen with people from outside the industry. Thirdly, as was true with the Airbnb founders, over time, the establishment embraces innovations that represent a long-term trend. Now, I'm going to show you how that's been relevant in a series of hospitality innovations. But let's go back to the start of hospitality. The start of hospitality didn't have any hotels. It basically had home sharing. When people traveled, they usually stayed in each other's homes. Now, that's sort of the way it was 1,000 or 2,000 years ago. Fast forward, pre-World War II, these were your choices in the United States of where you might stay. If you were an aristocrat, you'd stay at the Hotel Del. And generally speaking, the hotel industry in the US represented very much the European style of service, because generally speaking, the people who stayed in hotels were people who had a lot of money. If you weren't staying in a place like that, you were staying in a place on the right, which is more of a boarding house, which is sort of the history of home sharing from a long time ago. And the fact that people who didn't have a lot of money would just get their basic, Maslowian needs at the bottom of the pyramid: food, sleep, and a place to sleep, met at a boarding house. What happened post-World War II is pretty interesting. Post-World War II, the foreshadowing of the first innovation in the hospitality industry I'm going to talk about was the fact that servicemen who had traveled around the world to fight wars came home, had a baby, got married, had a couple kids, and Eisenhower created an interstate highway system. So pre-World War II, the average American had never left their state. Pre-World War II, the average American had never left their state. Post-World War II and into the 1950s, with these new families, people were going to drive, and they're going to drive, and if they're going to drive, they need a place to stay. So Kemmons Wilson, in the outskirts of Memphis, created the first Holiday Inn, because the basic unmet need was there's a collection of people who actually are now traveling a lot. They need predictability. They need a place that they can feel is safe. In terms of hierarchy needs, they need the basics, but they need something better than a boarding house, especially if it's a family. And that's actually really how the hotel industry in the United States got started. And in fact, these 3 companies, Four Seasons, Marriott, and Hyatt, proud to say, since my first hotel was a motel in the Tenderloin called the Phoenix 30 years ago, bought this place. Anybody ever been to the Phoenix for a party or a restaurant? Yeah. It's fun. Well, a tough neighborhood, but I started with a motel, and so did these guys. The Four Seasons' first property was a motor lodge in Toronto. So the start of the hotel industry as we know it with chain hotels was actually relatively humble, with motor lodges that met needs associated with families traveling for the first time. So fast forward to the 1970s. So now a lot of hotel companies have grown. The next real trend that happened in hospitality real estate was timeshare. Now you might ask, really, is timeshare the next big trend? That doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Well, what was happening in the 1970s is the foreshadowing was people wanted to actually have a second home. They couldn't afford it, but in the 1970s, real estate prices, residential real estate prices, for the first time really ever, were just skyrocketing. And people knew that because inflation was going up, it was valuable to have a hard asset. So timeshare, the advent of timeshare came at a time where people said, I better get a hard asset. Now, whether timeshare was a good investment as a hard asset or not, we're not going to get into here. But what we are going to say is in the early days, timeshare was a collection of innovators that had nothing to do with the travel business. It was people from outside the industry. Now, people from within the industry, and this is typically true of an innovation, ridiculed it. And of course, we've heard a lot of ridicule around timeshare until number 3 on that innovation trend happened. all the big guys got in, and the timeshare industry grew 10 times as large after the big hotel companies decided it was a long-term trend that they wanted to embrace. Okay, let's look at another trend. These are two innovators from outside the travel industry. That's Ian Schrager on the left, Bill Kimpton on the right. Not from the travel industry. Ian Schrager owned Studio 54 before he went to prison. And Bill Clinton never went to prison. Bill Kimpton was an investment banker. And Bill Kimpton's point of view, he traveled a lot as an investment banker in Europe, and he said, you know what, it's interesting. There are a lot of great independent hotels in Europe that have breakfast, and there's just sort of like nice, great service. It's not predictable. Why don't we have more of those in the US? Schrager's point of view was, you know, why don't we have more nightlife in hotels? Why are hotels so boring? So the boutique hotel trend started with these two guys in the early 1980s. And they started creating these cool, interesting boutique hotels in major metro markets. Now, again, the establishment's first reaction to this was, this is all sizzle, no substance. This is all style, no service. Basically, these are like, there's no predictability. But what they really were able to show was that there was a new consumer who actually was interested in a localized, personalized experience and was willing to accept the standard deviation associated with boutique hotels, meaning they're not going to have their perfect experience. They may have their, what I used to say as a boutique hotelier is, you may have your worst and your best experience in a boutique hotel. And people actually said over time, they got better and better at picking the right hotel, and these guys got bigger. So I did the same. Over 24 years of being CEO of Joie, Vivre, with my last hotel being the Epiphany in downtown Palo Alto, for those of you who know Palo Alto. I created 52 boutique hotels with my team, and I was called, actually I was never called a disruptor, but that's actually what we were thought of, as we were a disruptor because the boutique hotel business started to siphon off some major corporate accounts and major guests who had been loyal to the big chains. Well, there's a great quote from, if when in doubt, quote this man. He has a lot of good quotes. But this is a particularly great quote for the disruption industry. First they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. Now, he was saying that in the context of the Brits in India, but the first day I started working at Airbnb 38 months ago, 400 employees, I gave a talk to the group, and I actually quoted this, and I said, this is going to be our relationship with hoteliers, with the travel industry, with convention meeting planners, with corporate travel managers, with landlords, and I just ticked it all. And I said, each one of these, they're going to ignore us, they're going to ridicule us, they're going to fight us, and then we're hopefully going to win. And the good news is, I can do a lot of check marks there over the course of the last few years in terms of how we've actually made a lot of progress. But what's interesting and what helps a lot is when the establishment jumps on the bandwagon. So when it comes to boutique hotels, the bandwagon was first jumped on by Starwood. Barry Sternlicht was from outside the hotel industry. He had sort of consolidated Starwood into one company with Westin and Sheraton. And he's the one who created W, which was sort of a boutique hotel on steroids. And then Marriott hired Ian Schrager to create the Edition hotels for Marriott, because Marriott knew we're sort of a Midwestern Utah brand, and we better do something to get a little bit more stylish, so let's hire Ian Schrager. And then Intercontinental bought Kimpton a couple years ago, and the largest hotel, so Joie was the second largest boutique hotel company in the US. Kimpton was the largest. We were both based in San Francisco. They were bought by Intercontinental. So again, that trend from foreshadowing of an unmet need to having the establishment jump on the bandwagon has been true. So that brings me to Airbnb and home sharing. So as I said, I didn't know a thing about home sharing. I didn't know a thing about Airbnb as of first quarter 2013 when Brian initially asked me just to help mentor him and then get more involved. They did say, okay, ultimately we want you to work part-time. I said, okay, I'll do 15 hours a week. I think the three founders misheard me because it was 15 hours a day about 2 weeks later. And I realized that I was strapping myself to this rocket ship with these three guys to help guide this company. at a time where it wasn't really clear which were the right options, which were the right. One of the hardest things, and Steve Jobs has talked about this, that one of the hardest things with a company that's growing so quickly is what you say no to. It's the collection of no's you say that ultimately allow your yeses to be with an exclamation point, because that was really important. And I think we did that relatively well the last 3 or 4 years. So Airbnb was foreshadowed. I want to tell you what the Airbnb foreshadowing was. The foreshadowing, first of all, was boutique hotels. I know boutique hotels pretty well. Boutique hotels succeeded because they were experience-driven. People were willing to put up with less predictability for more experience. And they wanted to have a connection with locals. And that's part of what that allowed. In Airbnb's case, you don't always get to see your host, but many times you do. But you're going to be in a residential neighborhood, and in most cases, and you're going to get to know a neighborhood and a part of a city you might not have gotten to know if you were staying in a downtown, bland hotel. So the home sharing movement, in many ways, was helped by the fact that boutique hotels grew as popular as they did. Secondly, 1995, VRBO and Craigslist were both started. Now, VRBO was started vacation rental by owner because there were a bunch of people around the world who had second homes, and they wanted to get to actually rent their second home during the 48 weeks of the year that they actually weren't there at their second home. So VRBO started that way, but it didn't actually take advantage of technology very well. And ultimately, it was owned by HomeAway, who was one of Airbnb's competitors when I first joined the company. Now it's owned by Expedia. Craigslist also got started as a way for people to rent a second bedroom or a third bedroom, usually on a monthly basis, to find a roommate. So the idea of hosts or people who have extra space that are then going to use some platform as a means to rent that space had a history way before Airbnb. And then thirdly, home swapping. Now, I don't know how many of you have ever done a home swap, and Airbnb is not a home swapping site, but home swapping started in 1953, the same year that Holiday Inn opened, interestingly enough. It started because the Dutch and Swiss Teachers Union needed to figure out a way to provide their union members, teachers, who had the whole summer off, an affordable way to take their family traveling because they didn't make a lot of money. So home swapping was started in 1953 as a result. So the idea that people actually can build trust and actually stay in someone else's home while they're traveling had some history. Each of these pieces, I think, if they hadn't happened, would not have made would not allowed Airbnb to have grown as quickly as it has. So these are the three founders, Joe, Nate, and Brian. Now, you probably know the founding story. I'll tell it to you briefly for those who don't. So Joe and Brian were roommates. Joe and Nate had been roommates before. Joe and Brian were having a hard time making their rent. This was October 2007. There was a design conference coming to town. They both went to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design. They knew friends coming to the conference. All of the hotels were sold out. So they put up a website and put 3 air mattresses on their living room floor and created Air Bed and Breakfast because they thought people going to the conference would actually stay on their air mattresses on their living room floor. 3 people did stay on their air mattresses, and that's how Airbnb got started. Now, initially, this is a funny story, these 3 guys thought that the TAM, the total addressable market for Airbnb, was how many air mattresses are there in the United States? That was it. No, actually, the company has grown to beyond air mattresses, and we have boats and castles and tree houses on the site. We have this says 2.2 million. That's true 2 months ago. We're probably at 2.5 million now, homes around the world on the Airbnb site. Now, that's also in 34,000 cities, 191 countries, and 90 million users. So that's how we've grown this quickly. The part that actually I'm going to start diving into is the fact that we're getting to stage 3 in home sharing of innovation. Okay, there's foreshadowing, there's an unmet need, and I think the unmet need was and I'll talk about this in a moment on the next slide. The unmet need was there's more people staying longer periods of time when they travel. There's a few reasons for that. But this happened just a few months ago. Accor Hotels, which owns Sofitel, it's one of the 5 largest global hotel chains. They bought One Fine Stay, a London-based luxury version of Airbnb, quite a bit smaller, provides all kinds of services, etc. Long story short is, last year, Hyatt invested in One Fine Stay. So Hyatt first invested in it, then Accor bought the whole company. So this is the start of what we're going to see around home sharing, where the establishment, and generally speaking, the relationship we've created with the global hotel companies has been pretty good. The hoteliers in major markets and some of the REITs, not so good. They're still, if it's ignore, ridicule, fight, win, I think we've gotten to win with the global hotel companies. We're not at win with some hoteliers who are individual hoteliers or REITs and people who own hotels. Generally speaking, the big hotel companies don't own their real estate. They're franchising companies. Now, here's one of the interesting stories. February 9th of this year, Smith Travel Research that publishes the STAR report, which is the most respected data analysis done globally for hotels. They had asked me a few months prior to this, before February, they said, could you give us all your data for Manhattan? We want to study Airbnb in Manhattan. It's your biggest market in the US. We want to see what effect you're having on hotels. Now, now, of course, we could have said no, and probably if they'd asked 2 years ago, we probably would have said no. But one of the things that we've learned over time is if we're going to be a company that's going to be the leader in the hospitality business, which we now are as the most valuable hospitality company in the world, we better be good at collaboration and sharing. And so we started sharing data with them. And what was fascinating is what they found from studying Airbnb in New York. Now, mind you, New York hotels have gone through 4 years of awful business. So it used to be terrible to travel to New York and it costs $800 to stay in a hotel. Well, it's a lot cheaper today because there's been a 30% growth in hotel supply in New York. But the hotel community in New York, many of whom I know, were actually blaming it all on Airbnb. Smith Travel did their study and said, number one, it's not Airbnb's fault. Because guess what? Airbnb, 35 to 40% of Airbnb travelers would actually have stayed at a friend or family for free or not made the trip. So there's been an expansion of the market due to Airbnb offering home sharing. Additionally, 16% of our room nights in Manhattan are people staying a month or longer. 60% of our room nights in Manhattan are people staying a week or longer. There's a trend, and there's a lot of evidence in this now, and there's going to be a big study that's going to come out this fall around this. There is a growing trend of people who just want to live there. If you've seen the Airbnb ad campaign recently, it's a bit of a foreshadowing of what some studies are going to come out and show, is there's a growing number of global nomads, digital nomads, who are traveling and not rooted in a particular place, and they want to go stay somewhere from a week to 2 or 3 months. And there aren't a lot of lodging choices that actually fit those needs. And Airbnb is a perfect fit for that. And in Manhattan, it was sort of evidence of what we could offer. So this is the 3 largest hotel companies. These are the 3 largest hotel companies in the world. In total, they have 2.2 million rooms. Airbnb has, as I said earlier, 2.2 million listings. This is not an apples to apples comparison. Let's be clear. Airbnb hosts, generally speaking, vast majority of them are not doing it full time. Yes, some people have a room down the hallway and they actually do it 365 a year. But most of our listings are entire home. 85% of them are people's primary home. And so generally speaking, they're not available all the time. But here's the interesting math in terms of TAM. And these 3 hotel companies, when you actually look at their total number of rooms, there are 16 million hotel rooms in the world. So these 3 hotel companies, the 3 biggest, represent about 14% of the market. So it shows how diffused the hotel industry is. So there's, the 3 biggest only have 14% of the market. Airbnb, 2.2 million listings. How many homes are there in the world? There are, in fact, 2.2 billion homes in the world. So 1 out of every 1,000 homes in the world today is actually on the Airbnb platform. Now, what does that mean? I really don't know. Does that mean we'll have a few more dots up there? Each dot represents doubling, the next dot is doubling in size. So that's to be seen. Obviously, as home sharing has become more legalized and normalized, it continues to grow, both on the demand and the supply side. You know we're a network effects business, and we're a marketplace. And that means we better be damn good at both the host side, how do you develop your hosts, and how do hosts continue to supply, as well as on the demand side. And generally speaking, our demand has been growing faster than our supply over the last 2 or 3 years. So I want to tell you a couple last stories, and then we're going to open it up for some Q&A. I love this story partly because, for 38 months now, I've been a piñata. I've been a piñata partly because I'm a hotelier, and I am an Airbnb executive, top exec. And I go on stage a lot at hotel conferences, and I, dodge tomatoes. And I go to lots and lots of public policy meetings with mayors and governors and sometimes heads of state to talk about why Airbnb is not a zero-sum game with the hotel industry. Generally speaking, in the US, we've had a lot of challenges in terms of some of our public policy. Much, much less so globally. This is an interesting story. So in Brazil obviously has the Olympics in the next few weeks, but they had World Cup 2 years ago. Brazil was really good about being able to get their stadiums built throughout the whole country of Brazil to be able to accommodate something as big as World Cup. But about a year before World Cup, Brazil actually started to figure out, the governors of some of the states, they did not have enough hotel rooms, and they did not have enough subsidy funds to subsidize hotel developers to build hotels that will then get mothballed after World Cup to reopen for the Olympics in Rio. And so they came to us, the governors of Brazil, and said, will you figure out how to get a bunch of Airbnb hosts out of Brazilian residents? And there was also a little bit of political, they needed to figure out also how to actually sell the World Cup and the Olympics to locals who were really pissed off that they were spending a lot of government money on these two events, but not enough on services. So what happened is there were 600,000 international visitors. Oops, not getting any movement. My tech friends back there, it's just not, for some reason, going, oops. We'll come back in a moment, I guess. So there were 600,000 international visitors to World Cup 2 years ago. There you go, 600, thank you. Of the 600,000 who went from some other country, who went to Brazil for World Cup, 120,000 of them stayed on Airbnb. 20% market share for World Cup. We'll be over that market share for the Rio Olympics this year. So why is this an interesting story? Not because of the market share part of it, but because there's a win-win-win here. The first win is the governors of Brazil didn't have to subsidize hotels to build hotels that would be mothballed, which is not a good thing for the government nor for the environment to actually use resources in that way. Number two is locals made money because generally speaking, 97% of every dollar that a local actually puts up there comes back to the local. 3%, we take 3%, and then we take 6 to 12% of the guest side of the equation. So locals made money. And thirdly, people who visited Brazil actually had a local experience. They got to know locals, they got to stay in neighborhoods, and no one got hurt. That was the thing I liked the most about it. Everything actually went relatively well. And so, good example. So I want to wrap up before we go into Q&A and go back to something I asked myself when I was joining Airbnb. First of all, I was like, should I even do this? Should I even join these guys? I don't even know. Like, I didn't know. I was still curious about this idea that how would these hosts have any training to do a great job of delivering on the guest experience? And that was important to me because, of course, I was in charge of hospitality for the company, training our hosts, making sure that We provided a delightful experience. Well, here's the fascinating fact that I hadn't thought of then that I know now. The average employee in a hotel stays in their job for 8 months. That's it. They leave the company, leave the hotel after 8 months. There's a few of you who've been in the hotel business here. You know what I'm talking about. Average hotel employees there 8 months. Most hotel companies do an annual performance review. Do the math. Most people never get an annual performance review because they've left by then. And then the other thing is, how many of you stay in a hotel and regularly fill out the online guest satisfaction survey? 1, 2, 3. OK. Yeah, well, that's about it. Actually, for a great hotel, they get 10% response rate from those guest satisfaction surveys. So they get the data, and they hoard the data. Most hotel companies never even share that data with the employees, who are the people who actually the data is about. So there's no feedback loop. There's no means for the employee to really know how they're doing, other than to know on occasion they do something wrong and they get caught doing something wrong. Airbnb, 70 to 75% of our hosts and guests review each other. 70 to 75%. So our hosts are getting instantaneous feedback that's meaningful to them because there's nobody else usually that's actually providing the service other than themselves that actually has a really important impact on their ability to make money. Because generally speaking, our search results are very influenced by quality and by overall review scores. So I can say now, 38 months later, yeah, I mean, when I joined, we were definitely not better than the overall hotel industry. But today we're a good bit higher. And it's partly because it just taps into the basic human motivations and psychology of people wanting to do a great job and giving them the feedback so they know if they're doing a great job or not. So the subtitle of this talk was Seeing and Surfing a Disruption. Well, I, after 38 months, am now going part-time at Airbnb. And I'm doing that partly because I told the guys when I started I was going to do 15 hours a week, and it was 60 hours a week pretty quickly. And so finally, now at age 55, I'm like, OK, I'm going to 25 hours a week, and they've allowed me to, which I'm happy about. So I'm surfing down in Baja a lot at a beach home I have down there. What I think is really interesting about seeing and then surfing the disruption, especially for somebody who's from outside the tech industry, is so much of it, at the end of the day, comes down to psychology. It comes down to, in my case, understanding that as the old guy, 21 years older than Brian, my boss, after being 24 years a CEO of a company with 3,500 employees that I created, all of a sudden I am now reporting to someone 21 years younger than me. How do I do the psychology of being both his mentor and his intern at the same time? Because I was his mentor on leadership, and I was his mentor on emotional intelligence. He was my mentor. I was the intern when it came to digital intelligence, because I didn't know a thing about tech. So being able to step back and understand psychology can help. Daniel Goleman has shown that 2/3 of the success of leaders in business has to do with their EQ, and only 1/3 comes from their IQ or from the amount of experience they have on the job. Additionally, the psychology of our hosts. How do we deliver to our hosts business and help them be incentivized to do a great job? And then the psychology of the guest. Why is it that there was an unmet need? And what was it in our research interviews that we saw in the early days of Airbnb that told us that we were onto something big here? So I just want to sort of put a word out there for all of you tech heads here, that psychology, which is not something that a lot of you actually probably took during college, can be a really big value in any kind of company. And for me, it certainly has been at Airbnb. So we're all over the world. One of the great things about being a global network effects business is once you've gotten to a certain size and a certain place, it's really a matter of just doing your best to continue to grow and to grow in new ways, but to make sure that we actually are living up to our promise. And our promise at Airbnb is to help people belong anywhere. And those two words are pretty important. There's a psychology behind the idea of belong. People are traveling around the world. They want to have a sense of belonging. But the part that's actually particularly interesting that a lot of people don't think about is Airbnb is in 34,000 cities of the world. Now, that makes it very complex because land use laws were created before the internet. And generally speaking, we have to deal with laws that we have to change. But the bottom line on that is the hotel industry can never be in 34,000 cities. No hotel company could ever do that. So I'm going to open it up for Q&A. And I just appreciate, Saeed, for you inviting me. And thank you. There's a mic back there.
Can you hear me? Hi, Chip. It's good to see you again.
Yes.
I'm actually living out of Airbnb right now for the past couple months, continue to do so. It's been a great experience. I was wondering, long term, in the way that eBay started with mom and pops and eventually 80% of the revenue roughly is super sellers, do you see longer term more savvy real estate investors and management longer term replacing kind of mom and pops individuals, especially as you're looking to move into business travel at Airbnb?
So yeah, we have 250,000 corporate accounts now on our business travel platform. 250,000 corporate accounts, mostly small businesses, but Morgan Stanley, Google, Barclays. Here's the interesting difference between us and eBay. That slide that shows we have 1 out of 1,000, that's not a slide that eBay would have shown or could have shown. And the other thing that's really relevant between us and eBay is we have political challenges with going the direction they went. So one of our biggest challenges today is public policy issues around illegal hotels. And it's a very relevant one that we care about a lot. Because if you have a city and it has a limited amount of supply of affordable housing, and a landlord is taking a building off the market and converting tenancies, monthly tenancies into nightly Airbnb guests, that's not good for the community. So we have done major cutbacks of listings like that. So if we see a listing like that, we take it down. We're looking at some new ways for us to actually figure it out before it ever goes up. So we're not interested in power sellers that way. We are interested in looking at how can someone who has their own listing actually grow as an entrepreneur and maybe help co-host other people's homes in a way that the platform can actually facilitate. Because there's some people who would love to be a host and have it be an Airbnb host, have that be their full living. They don't have to do anything else. But it's hard to do that with just a singular place. And as long as they're doing it for other people's primary homes or in markets where you can do it for a secondary home, we like that idea.
Thanks, Chip.
So more question. We've got one here. We got one there. OK, yes.
Great presentation, Chip. Do you feel like there's room for either a loyalty or an engagement program within Airbnb?
We already have it. It's in the product. I mean, here's the, so let me, I know that was a glib answer from me, but here's the truth. Loyalty programs from hotel companies and airlines are bribery programs. That's what they are. They're loyalty and in the form of bribery such that I am stuck with United Airlines. God damn it. And you JetBlue people love that one, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk. Oh, God, I've got myself in trouble here. Well, here's my truth. Here's my truth around this. I'm loyal to United because I have a lot of points. But it's a bribery program. It's not a loyalty program for me. It's a bribery program. And it's not a recognition program. What I would like to see over time is us having a recognition program, which means that across the platform, we have some kind of property management system, CMS system, where our hosts across the platform can figure out, here's a loyal person who's taken 20 trips on Airbnb this year, and here's the things they care about. It would be nice as a technology company to be able to capture that and share that without having the guest have to say that all the time. But I don't think anytime soon we're going to look at how do we financially recognize people. Yes. Next question, right here.
By the way, I agree with you 100% that global services is a ball and chain and not an incentive program.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the word mothballing a few times. And as you drive along highways like US 1 and US 66 and the old US system before the Eisenhower days you referenced, you see an awful lot of small mom and pop motels. It used to be the Riverside Inn and so on.
Yep.
And they went away with the big chains. And I think that your adoption numbers are absolutely staggering. So the question is, as you roll forward, while you might not be hosting the National Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Convention, you are getting a lot of corporate business. People see it as a real opportunity for an entrepreneurial start. Can you see the chains actually diminishing in a meaningful way, similar to the motels of the past, because of what you're building?
No, I don't see it, and the reason I don't see it, there's a few reasons. There's the Smith travel data is one piece of it. The fact that our growth is not necessarily zero-sum with the hotel chains. The core business for Hilton and Marriott is the two-day road warrior paying a top dollar midweek and doing two cities in the same week. That will never be our core traveler on Airbnb. It doesn't mean we don't have people who do that. We do. But the business traveler needs efficiency, and 24-hour desk is an efficiency. They need services, and they need proximity. And generally, the proximity is downtown or near a convention center. Airbnb's, in San Francisco, our biggest market is the Mission. There's not one hotel in the Mission. So we tend to, and Brooklyn now has a lot of hotels, but it's partly because Airbnb proved there was a lot of demand for lodging in Brooklyn. So I think that what you'll see is, I don't think you'll see the big hotel chains. In fact, that's part of the reason the big hotel chains have been actually slightly neutral to, in some cases, even slightly positive to us in the press, is because they don't think we're directly competitive. If you have an independent hotel that's badly run and overpriced in Brooklyn, we will compete with you, for sure. If you have an extended stay product, we might compete with you a little bit because our average length of stay for an Airbnb traveler is twice as long as for a hotel guest.
Maybe one last question.
Where's the mic?
Here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just moved in the Bay Area. I'm just new here, so I don't know anybody. Talking about Airbnb, what is your challenges in opening new markets? And do you have any problems in cultures and things like that? I'm just wondering.
Do you have problems with countries?
I guess you're strong in this USA and Europe.
So we're in
other countries?
Let's have another question. I'll give it a quick answer, but I want to make sure we have another more substantive question. And I'm not trying to beat you up. We're in 191 countries and 34,000 cities. We're everywhere, except we're not in North Korea. We're not in Syria. We're not in Iran.
Why not?
And there's one other place. I'm sorry. I will tell you, we went to Cuba. So 15 months ago, we went to Cuba, and we now have 3,000 listings in Cuba, 3,000 homes. I would say of the ones I just mentioned, the one that's most likely that would happen next is Iran. But not this year. Okay, one more question, briefly.
Yeah. Any other? Yes, please. She's bringing it for you.
Okay.
So, I love Airbnb because at the end of the day, with inequalities of income rising, global prosperity, it really helps lift standards of living. I grew up in India. We've had a sharing economy forever and ever, whether it's a TV set that you're sharing with your neighbors, or whatever. My question is that what about rents and the impact on rents? And I know there have been a lot of politically charged articles on the subject, but just love your personal view. There's the economic prosperity on one hand and then rising rents on the other. Yeah,
I'd say there's two pieces to this. This deals with the affordability question. The positive is there are 40% of Airbnb hosts are people who come from the creative class, or they are independently doing consulting, things like that. They're entrepreneurs outside of being an Airbnb host. So for some of these people, they would not have been able to live in San Francisco in the Mission or in Brooklyn and stay there without having the security of the income. The flip side of it is that if landlords know that actually their Airbnb hosts in their building as tenants are doing this, they're going to be able to charge more. And so there's two pieces to that. One is San Francisco's solution to that, which we don't love, but it is San Francisco's solution, is that you can't do it unless it's your primary home. So actually that solves it a little bit, because it means that you can't take a secondary home, or say it's a pied-à-terre secondary home, and put it on full-time year-round. So it actually sort of takes away the wind of the sails for the people who are speculators. So that's one way to solve it. Another way to solve it, at least from our perspective, has been how do we create some ability for landlords to actually work more closely with their tenants, such that we have down here in San Jose, we actually have a pilot with Equity Residential, a guy named Sam Zell, who's a big real estate developer out of Chicago. And they have opened up a 500-unit building and are giving all 500 of their tenants the ability, with a limited number of days a year, to actually be on the site with an amendment to the lease. Now, not everybody's doing it. In fact, the vast majority of people are not. But what it's done is it's all of a sudden, and what the landlord's doing is taking the money that they are actually making from that and giving some of it to charity and putting the rest of it into ongoing higher common area maintenance. So that actually it becomes a benefit to the building. I think in the long run, we'll see more of that. I also think in the long run, we're going to see a whole new style of residential building built that is sharing economy driven from the start. Less parking, more common areas, more ability to share, Black & Decker power drills that are used in the course of their whole life. A power drill is used 13 minutes. That could use a sharing economy, but no one's going to start a business based upon that, hopefully. But the idea that people can actually have a community that is, instead of me not knowing my neighbors, there's a way for us to connect with each other. And I think that's, at the end of the day, what Airbnb is trying to foster. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.